Future Perfect, you're tuned into Triple R and you're here with Ben as we approach 10:20 this morning. The number of empty homes in Melbourne is up 16% as of last year. Released last month, independent economic think tank Prosper Australia's latest annual speculative data update tracks vacant and underused homes based on residential water usage. The report shows the number of empty properties across Melbourne rose from 27,408 to nearly 32,000, increasing the proportion of vacant homes from 1.5% in 2023 to 1.7% in 2024. This data comes despite the ongoing housing crisis, an approximate 24,000 homeless Melburnians, and the government increasing taxes on unused properties. Raina Fahey is Prosper Australia's Advocacy Director and joins me on the line to walk us through what this data tells us about our current housing policies and what we need to change. Raina, do I have you there?
You do. Good morning.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'll start off by getting you to tell us about the terminology and methodology from this reporting. What's the delineation between vacant and underused homes, and how was water usage data accessed and used to define these?
Yeah, sure. So we use water use as a proxy for vacancy because we can tell whether a house is being used or not, whether it's using water. And it's one of the utilities that we can access in a pretty consistent way across the city. So totally empty homes are homes that use absolutely zero water. So they're connected to the water supply, which generally indicates that it's a house or it has been a house in the past. And underused homes are homes that use on average less than 50 litres per day, which can account for a dripping tap. And it's about a quarter of what the average single person house would use. So whilst there might be one or two people who use less than that, they are generally the exception to the rule. And when you look at the water use data across all of the usage of water, it's a pretty clear drop down below 50 litres per day. So we can tell from that data that there's 31,890 completely empty homes in Melbourne and over 100,000 underused homes, if you include the further 69,000.
Yeah, a pretty good indicator of signs of life is water usage, but some pretty extraordinary numbers. You've said alongside the report that Melbourne added enough totally empty homes last year to effectively wipe out 1 in every 9 new dwellings. And we're facing a set of issues here that we can't really build our way out of. Can you tell us more about how this rise in empty dwellings is undermining the benefit of new housing supply?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the question that we really want the government to be talking about, because housing supply doesn't just mean a permit or someone starting to build a house or even someone someone finishing building a house. Housing supply happens when someone moves in and it becomes a home. And so we want to understand all of the parts of that system. And we've got a national crisis. Everyone's talking about it, and we think that's fantastic because we've been talking about this for a really long time and quite often by ourselves. But now that everyone's aware that this housing distribution is a problem, we really need to be looking at the data that tells the whole story of housing distribution. And vacancy and speculation are a huge part of that. And we certainly... that's accepted as common when you have that conversations within the property sector. When we talk to developers and builders, and everyone knows that land banking is a thing, and land banking is holding back a supply. But when it comes to the government, they seem to just have this sort of blinkered view of the situation and don't seem to want to talk about that part of the conversation.
And the sort of top 5 council areas by empty homes in 2024, as per the report, were Whitehorse, Marybeck, Borrandurra, Hume and Darebin. What does this tell us about these councils' approach to housing, and what does it mean for these areas at large?
Well, it tells us a few things. I don't think it tells us too much about the council's approach because councils are doing they're doing their best, and certainly when we look at other sets of data, things like housing approvals and permits and all those sorts of things, those councils are areas where there's a large amount of growth, so lots of people want to live there, and lots of building development is happening. So councils are probably not necessarily the hold-up. The issue is more around when you have a huge impetus to have market activity, then you're going to have an increase in speculation and empty homes. So, I mean, like areas like Whitehorse, we know is an area of massive development. It is effectively, I mean, if you look at Box Hill, effectively Melbourne's second CBD, there's a huge amount of investment that's happening in there. So there is a huge amount of capital gains. We did some very rough back-of-the-envelope numbers and saw that the rental income from a property, the average property in Whitehorse is about a quarter of the annual capital gains. So if you've got an apartment in Box Hill, you can rent it out and you can make amount of money from that, or you can just hold on to it, not risk putting a tenant in it who might damage it, and just sell it for capital gains, and you're going to be doing significantly fine. There's a huge amount of money to be made, because the thing is that land markets are monopolies. Like they function differently in the way that other things that we need. Like if you go and buy, I don't know, tomatoes, land is something that you have to have, whereas a tomato is something that people can choose not to have. So that means that the capital gains that's created by that community demand is really high, especially in areas where communities, people want to live.
Yeah.
So we see increased activity in emptiness, where we see increased activity in development and demand.
Yeah, and just on Whitehorse City, the council mayor, Kirsten Langford, attributed the high rate of vacant homes in that area to the significant student population shifting away to the CBD since the COVID pandemic. How does her assessment of that sit with you? Is it fair to point to the flow-on effects of the pandemic?
Well, I mean, we can all speculate. Every single person that I do has a guess as to why this is happening, but it is all a guess. What we don't have is any proper data on this, and this has been one of Prosper's concerns. The reason we started doing this research in the first place is that when people talked about vacancy in the market, they were talking about advertised vacancy rates within the rental sector. So when you hear about 5% vacancy rate, that tells you how many properties are available to rent, but it wasn't looking at the whole system of housing. So that's why we tried to sort of colour in that gap with our speculative vacancies report. But it doesn't tell us anything qualitative. It doesn't tell us, has someone, is the land that's empty largely owned by individuals, or is it largely owned by corporations or institutions? Is it government-owned land? We don't know. So we really want the government to go, this is really important data. We need to understand the shape of this problem so that we can best use our tax settings specifically to best encourage right use of homes.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just speculation on speculation, if you will.
Which is really ironic.
Yeah. Speaking with Raina Fay, who is Prosper Australia's Advocacy's Director, all about their latest report indicating a further surge in vacant homes in Melbourne. And that report tells us that housing vacancy is a symptom of a wider problem of speculation in the housing market, as you've sort of said, but that property owners are engaging in rational behaviour by participating in that process and leaving homes empty, choosing to lose out on rent now in exchange for a bigger tax-friendly profit when they sell later. How have we found ourselves with housing policies that are enabling this practice and leaving homes empty and allowing property owners to sort of play that game?
Yeah, it's a really great question because it's really complicated. Effectively, what we've done is convert housing into a financial asset, and therefore, the housing market is playing out like you would expect a financial asset market to be playing out. But the problem is that housing plays another role, which is somewhere for people to live, and quite often the needs of people needing to find somewhere to live get outbid by the people who are wanting to, play the land game and make large amounts of money. I mean, if you go to a house auction and you are a first home buyer, you're up against developers and investors, and that's not a level playing field because you have different access to capital, you have different access to being able to buy, to get loans. So it's not really a fair market. And what we say is that we need to rebalance the tax system so that we remove the incentives to speculate out of the market. We want to encourage people to be making we want to encourage people to be investing in Australia, but we want to encourage people to be investing in things like business and innovation and sustainability and creativity and all of those great things. But it's for many investors, it is a simpler and more effective investment strategy to just buy and hold on to an asset and than it is to make a more risky investment decision. And we just want to rebalance that.
Yeah.
Which is where the national conversation around tax reform is so critically important, because we are dealing with big picture issues. We're not dealing with that granular. This is not stuff that councils can deal with. This is stuff that needs to be dealt with at a macro level.
Yeah, and at a macro level where I suppose quite an indictment that, as the language is used in the report, it is a rational move from people to be sort of engaging in that wasteful behaviour. And so, yeah, the policies coming down from above that are allowing that to happen is pretty jarring to sort of see play out in this way. I wanted to ask about sort of where we can go from here. So Prosper Australia advocates for shifting taxation onto land using broad-based land taxes and value uplift capture to combat the waste and inequity of land speculation. Can you tell us more about that approach, and I suppose what policymakers can take away more widely from the reporting?
Yeah, sure. Because on a philosophical level, we're aware of a concept of rent seeking, which is where people are looking for opportunities of easy gain, where you can buy something and hold on to it and then sell it off. And that behaviour can be really damaging. So we want to try and limit that in our economy and encourage more productive and innovative work. So we want to shift taxes off work and production and onto land and natural resources. So how that works on a more practical level is looking at the types of things that we're taxing and going, how do we shift that in a gradual way? Like, we don't want to just completely wipe the slate clean and start again, because that would be really disruptive and cause a whole lot of financial pain across our community. So we just want to look at ways that we can transition our economy to more sustainable ways that capture the gains that are created by our society as a whole. So things like reducing income taxes and reducing payroll taxes are a really important way to start doing that, and transferring them onto land taxes primarily. But also we need to look at things like resources. Certainly Australia is one of the most resource-rich nations in the world, and we are doing a pretty terrible job of pricing resources. So if we treat the Australian nation as a company, we have this amazing asset and we're selling it for a very, very cheap price, to the point that international markets kind of quietly snigger behind their hands at us because we sell stuff for so cheap. Imagine if Australia had its own state-owned resources company like some of the other resource-rich countries do, like Norway and Saudi Arabia and places like that. If we had our own state-owned resources company that sold our natural resources at a significant profit, we wouldn't need to tax nurses and teachers.
Yeah, and some great work that Prosper's doing to sort of approach or suggest some different approaches forward. Not everyone has been thrilled with Prosper's work. I'd like to end on the government's response to your research. The Age reported a spokesperson from the Victorian government that defended its policy direction and cast doubt on Prosper's methodology, saying the government used sophisticated data matching techniques to detect vacant properties that need to pay vacant residential land tax rather than looking at utilities use, and went on to point to ongoing measures they've introduced to support housing. How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, great. Honestly, the government has significantly more resources than we do, and we would love to see them doing this work. But we'd like to see a little bit more transparency around it as well, because sophisticated is a pretty cool word, but what does that actually mean in practice? We would love them to be more transparent with the methodologies that they are using to try and identify vacant land. But the bigger problem is not just going after individual properties, because that's quite an ineffective way of collecting tax. We'd rather see sort of more of a systemic overview. And we need to be really straight up. The Victorian government is leading the way on this stuff on a national front. We're getting significant evidence building up amongst things like first home buyer rates and loan approval data to show that Victoria is the best state to be living in if you want to buy a house and you're a young person. And that is a lot to do with the way that the government is approaching tax. And we hope that other states can start to follow by their example. Things like value capture legislation is really important. When the government announces that it's going to build a great big new piece of infrastructure, the people that benefit from that are people who are going to use the infrastructure, but also people whose land value is going to go up significantly because of the infrastructure that gets put in place. And we think part of that socially created value should be captured back to invest in more sustainable infrastructure.
Yeah. You can learn more about this and read Prosper Australia's latest speculative vacancies data update at their website, prosper.org.au. Again, Raina Fay is Prosper's Advocacy Director. Raina, thank you so much for joining us today on Future Perfect.
My absolute pleasure. And safe and happy Christmas to everyone on Triple R Community.
Likewise. Happy holidays.